The library security guard's voice echoed across the silent reading room as he pointed at the 52-year-old woman hunched over military history books. "You don't belong here, ma'am. This section is for serious researchers, not homeless people looking for shelter." Sarah Martinez slowly closed her worn notebook, her weathered hands trembling slightly as other patrons turned to stare. None of them could see the faded airborne wings tattooed on her wrist, hidden beneath a threadbare sleeve. What happens next will leave you speechless. If stories like Sarah's matter to you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged before their true story was known? Stay with me because what someone discovers about Sarah will change everything. The library security guard's voice echoed across the silent reading room as he pointed at the 52-year-old woman hunched over military history books. "You don't belong here, ma'am. This section is for serious researchers, not homeless people looking for shelter." Sarah Martinez slowly closed her worn notebook, her weathered hands trembling slightly as other patrons turned to stare. None of them could see the faded airborne wings tattooed on her wrist, hidden beneath a threadbare sleeve. What happens next will leave you speechless. If stories like Sarah's matter to you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged before their true story was known? Stay with me, because what someone discovers about Sarah will change everything. Sarah had been coming to this downtown library for 3 months now, always choosing the same corner table near the military history section. Her clothes were clean, but worn, her backpack patched with duct tape. She never caused trouble, never spoke loudly, just read and took careful notes in a small notebook. The security guard, a young man named Derek, who had been on the job for 6 months, had been watching her for weeks. To him, she looked like another homeless person using the library as a warm place to spend the day. Today, he decided to act. Single quote, "Sam, I've told you before," Derek said loudly, his voice carrying across the hushed space. "You can't just camp out here all day. This is a public library, not a homeless shelter." Sarah looked up from her book about the Persian Gulf War. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes held a weariness that came from more than just age. "I'm reading," she said quietly. "I'm not bothering anyone. You're bothering everyone just by being here," Derek replied, his voice getting louder. "Look around. People are uncomfortable. You smell, your clothes are dirty, and frankly, you don't belong in this section. These books are for students and researchers." Other patrons began to turn and stare. Some looked uncomfortable with the confrontation. Others nodded in agreement with Derek. A few pulled out their phones, though whether to call for help or record the scene wasn't clear. "I have every right to be here," Sarah said, standing slowly. Her voice was steady but soft. "I'm a taxpayer and a citizen." "Really?" Derek scoffed. "When's the last time you paid taxes? When's the last time you had a job? You've been coming here for months, and I'm tired of it. Time to go." He stepped closer, and Sarah instinctively took a step back. The movement caught the attention of more people, and a small crowd began to form around them. "Please," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I just need to finish my research. I'm writing something important." "Research?" Derek laughed harshly. "What could you possibly be researching? How to find the next free meal?" A few people in the crowd chuckled, but others looked increasingly uncomfortable with Derek's behavior. A middle-aged librarian named Mrs. Chen approached from behind the reference desk, but Derek waved her off. "I got this," he said. "Ma'am, you need to leave now, or I'm calling the police." Sarah's hands shook as she began putting her books back in her bag. The small notebook fell to the floor, its pages scattering. As she knelt to gather them, Derek saw what was written on one of the pages. "What's this?" he said, picking up a sheet of paper. "Nighthawk 17. What kind of fantasy nonsense is this?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Those weren't fantasy words. They were her call sign from 28 years ago, when she was Captain Sarah Martinez of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, flying dangerous missions into enemy territory during Operation Desert Storm. "Give that back," she said, reaching for the paper. Her voice was firmer now, with an edge that made Derek pause for just a moment, but he didn't give it back. Instead, he held it up for others to see. "Look at this," he announced to the growing crowd. "She thinks she's some kind of military hero." Nighthawk 17 probably watched too many war movies. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some laughed, others looked embarrassed by the spectacle. But one man in the back, an elderly gentleman with silver hair and a Vietnam veteran's cap, stepped forward. "What did you just say?" the older man asked, his voice cutting through the noise. Derek repeated the call sign mockingly. "Nighthawk 17. She's got pages of this military fantasy stuff." The older man's face went pale. He pushed through the small crowd until he was standing directly in front of Sarah. She looked up at him from where she knelt on the floor, still trying to gather her scattered papers. "Captain Martinez," the man whispered, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Sarah froze. She looked up at the man more carefully, taking in his weathered face and kind eyes. After a moment, recognition dawned. "Colonel Patterson?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The crowd fell silent as the two veterans stared at each other. Colonel Patterson reached down and helped Sarah to her feet, then turned to face Derek and the assembled crowd. "This woman," he said, his voice strong and clear, "is Captain Sarah Martinez, one of the finest helicopter pilots I ever had the honor to serve with. She flew 63 combat missions in Desert Storm, saved countless lives, and earned 3 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart." Derek's face went red. He looked back and forth between Sarah and the colonel, confusion and embarrassment warring on his features. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Look at her. She's just a homeless woman. She's a war hero," Colonel Patterson said firmly. "I was her commanding officer. I watched her fly into hostile territory, night after night, to extract wounded soldiers and carry out special operations missions. She flew when others wouldn't, went where others couldn't go." Sarah stood quietly, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't heard her military record spoken aloud in years, and the pride in Colonel Patterson's voice brought back memories she had tried to bury. The crowd was completely silent now. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, had tears in her eyes. Even some of the people who had been nodding along with Derek earlier looked ashamed. Colonel Patterson wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to command. "This woman flew Black Hawks in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world," he continued. "She saved my life twice. Once when my helicopter went down behind enemy lines, and once when we were under heavy fire during an extraction mission. Her call sign wasn't Nighthawk 17 because it sounded cool. It was because she could see, in the dark, navigate by instinct, and fly missions that other pilots said were impossible." Derek stood frozen, the paper still in his hand. The mockery had drained from his face, replaced by growing horror at what he had done. "After the war," Colonel Patterson went on, "Sarah suffered from severe PTSD and traumatic brain injury from an IED explosion during her last mission. She lost everything fighting for our country, and then fought for years to get the help she deserved from the VA system." Sarah finally found her voice. "Colonel, please," she said softly. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," he replied. "These people need to understand what they just witnessed. You've spent your life serving others, and this is how you're treated." He turned back to Derek, his eyes blazing with anger. "You should be ashamed of yourself. This woman has done more for this country than most people will do in 10 lifetimes, and you treated her like garbage because of how she looks." Derek's hand shook as he handed the paper back to Sarah. I didn't know," he whispered. "That's exactly the problem," Colonel Patterson said. "You didn't know, but you judged anyway. You saw someone who looked down on their luck and decided they didn't deserve basic human dignity." The crowd began to disperse, many people looking ashamed and uncomfortable. Some approached Sarah to apologize. Others simply left quickly, unable to face what they had witnessed. Mrs. Chen came over with a box of tissues and a gentle smile. "Captain Martinez," she said softly, "I had no idea. Please know that you are always welcome here, always." Sarah took the tissues gratefully. "Thank you," she said. "I'd been researching for a book about women helicopter pilots in Desert Storm. So many stories have never been told." Colonel Patterson smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. "That sounds like exactly the kind of project the world needs to read. Have you found a publisher?" "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "It's been challenging." "Well," the colonel said, reaching into his wallet for a business card, "I happen to know some people in the publishing world. Military history is important, especially stories like yours." As the library returned to its normal quiet atmosphere, Derek stood alone near the security desk. His supervisor, who had witnessed the entire scene, approached him with a serious expression. We need to talk, she said quietly. Meanwhile, Sarah packed her materials with Colonel Patterson's help. Her hands had stopped shaking, and there was a strength in her posture that hadn't been there an hour before. "Colonel," Sarah said, as they finished gathering her papers, "thank you for speaking up. I had forgotten how it felt to have someone believe in me." "You never needed anyone to believe in you, Sarah," he replied. "You just needed to remember who you are. You're Nighthawk 17, and that will never change, no matter what anyone else thinks." As they walked toward the library exit together, Sarah realized something had shifted. The shame and invisibility she had carried for so long felt lighter somehow. She was still facing the same struggles, still dealing with the aftermath of her service and sacrifice, but she was no longer facing them alone. The story of what happened that day spread quickly through the veteran community. Within weeks, Sarah had connected with other female veterans, found better resources for housing and mental health support, and secured interest from 3 publishers for her book project. Derek, meanwhile, enrolled in sensitivity training and began volunteering with a local veterans organization. He never forgot the lesson he learned that day about the danger of judging people by their appearance. 6 months later, Sarah's book proposal was accepted by a major publisher. The advance was enough for her to secure stable housing and continue her research. She dedicated the book to all the invisible veterans who serve their communities quietly, without recognition, long after their military service has ended. But, perhaps most importantly, she dedicated it to the reminder that heroes don't always look like what we expect them to look like. Sometimes they look tired, or worn down, or forgotten, but they're still heroes, and their stories still matter. The last line of her book proposal read, "We are all more than the worst day of our lives, and more than the first impression we make. Sometimes it takes someone else's recognition to help us remember who we really are."